she's a faculty member in the doctoral program for 2 universities, for Creighton and Bellevue. And so she has a lot of experience with a myriad of things. And so at this time, Kimberly Grassmeyer will be educating us on women leadership styles and how they're evolving.
Are you on mute, Kim?
I am. Thank you, Shauna. Is that better?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Perfect. So first of all, I'm hoping that everyone can see a screen that says Women's Leadership Evolving with Us. Is that correct? Fabulous. So interestingly, you know, it doesn't matter how often you do this, I'm kind of shaking here. So I hope that I trust that this will go well. But so thank you all for giving me the opportunity to talk about something that I care just a ton about. As the presenter, since I have you my screen up, that doesn't mean that means I can't see your faces. And so I want to call out Joyce again very quickly, because again, masterful job of really engaging people throughout and calling people by name, which I thought was just terrific. This approach is going to be a little different because we've got an hour together for me to share some ideas and to get you reflecting. And then we'll have another hour in which we'll have small group conversation about these concepts. So the important thing is that you be jotting down responses to a variety of questions. There's about a dozen questions through the course of this time together that is really meant to be deep, reflective time for you. So I've got a little timer on my phone. We'll have about a minute or two on each of those questions, but it's just a different approach, and I just wanted to acknowledge that up front. My goal for the time together is that that this conversation will be meaningful to you, obviously, deeply reflective time, but genuinely empowering for you and giving you some language and some concepts that will help you move forward on your leadership journey. My goal is that you'll really feel this stuff, not just think about it. So that's another piece. Almost always when I talk about leadership with women, there will be a point in time in which someone will choke up or tear up because they think about somebody who's made such a difference in their life. And that's always a delight to me because we do owe where we are to someone who laid a path before us. And so for me, that was my grandmother. For you, you will come up with ideas throughout the course of this time. I really loved meeting all of you this morning, and it was fun to hear a couple of you say that you were Gold Torch students and are now back here paying it forward. And again, that's the exact model, and it's a very feminine or female model. So we should be proud of that, and we should own that. I can predict, again, from the years of doing this, I can predict that we'll have really rich conversation because there are going to be some really wide differences in how you have experienced the world up till now and how you view leadership based on things like your age or whether you're rural or urban or suburban person, maybe based on race or your gender identity or your income level. You'll probably walk away from this hour thinking about privilege maybe a little bit differently than you did before. So, and then lastly, I hope you'll walk away thinking about these concepts such that you'll become so sensitized that you'll begin to see things maybe a little differently as you move forward. I literally cannot read an article, I can't listen to a newscast without thinking of it through the lens of women's leadership. So hopefully in a small way, it'll become a part of what you're doing as well. So that's my goal today. Each of us will have our own journey. Our journeys look very, very different, but you get the goal or the promise, particularly for the younger women on the call, is that we're reaching the point finally, I think, that most of us really do get to choose what our journey is going to look like. And we get to choose that freely. So it's a wonderful, wonderful time to be you. I think it was a wonderful time to be me too, but it's really a wonderful time to be you. So whether or not we really recognize it, we're women of extraordinary privilege. We're educated women in the United States of America, which is a really, really rich country. And I often think to myself that particularly with a Ph.D., being a woman in this country, I am probably, I can't even do the math, I'm probably among the top 1/1000th of 1% of women in the world in terms of the opportunity that's available to me. And I don't take that with a grain of salt at all. So in my worldview, as a woman leader, I think it's really important that we kind of claim what's important to us and be able to have an elevator pitch or to talk about things that are important to us and to do that unapologetically. So in my worldview, feminism isn't a dirty word. I know that feels a little different for a lot of women, but for me, it's not a dirty word and it's not ancient history. It's a journey that people are still on and a fight that people are still fighting to a degree. In my worldview, Black lives matter, but blue lives matter. And women's voices matter and men's voices matter and love is love. There's a lot of things that I care about, and they almost all come from a place of really believing that I'm a child of God, but I'm only one child of God. All the other children of God matter too. So I'm as important as anyone. When I walk in a room, I want to feel like I'm as important as anyone in the room, but I'm not more important than anyone else in the room, right? So you're going to have my respect, whether you choose to be a leader or a follower or something else, whatever's on your heart. But I'll expect that you provide me with that same level of respect, and I will value that respect if you grace me with it. So that's really, that's just really an important thing that you know about how I approach the world. So having said all of that, my first reflection question for you, I'll give you just 1 minute or so to do this, is what is your own view? Oh, I'm sorry, I should say this again. When we go into the breakout sessions, we'll be in small groups, and I'm going to ask more questions than you're going to be able to talk about, for sure. But I think they're questions that build on each other and will bring you to a point, I hope, that you can feel comfortable with talking about at least one of the questions. So my first question is, what is your view of feminism and your place in the world? I wish I had put on some music. I should have. Can you take 1 minute to write down what your view of feminism is and how that fits in your worldview? And I'll wait, I'll let you know. There's 30 seconds left. Okay, that's one moment in time. I hope that was fun to just spend a moment thinking about that. So the next thing that I just want to say as we get into the real meat of the presentation is that there's a couple of things that may strike you as we go through. So I want to just acknowledge those up front. The first thing is that when we talk about women and men, or race, or many of the other differentiators that we all seem to butt our heads up against every day, is that we end up talking about these very broad generalities. And those generalities are not true for all people at all times. So if something doesn't resonate for you, throw it out. I'm not I'm not expecting you to believe everything I say. I'm not expecting you to agree with everything that I say. I'm just providing you some fodder for thought. So those generalities may or may not fit for you, and it's okay to discard them. But the goal is to have you name your own truth and be able to talk about that in ways that maybe other people can understand. So those are the two things that that start us. Secondly, we're going to talk about some really old theories here to figure out how women got to where we are today. And that means that it's absolutely a binary representation, male, female. And all of these theories, or most of the theories that we're going to talk about today, predated conversation about anything other than that they just weren't recognized. So it's important that you understand that that's the world, that they came from a world that was a little different than what we're living in today. And if you can, I would just invite you to find the grains of truth that you can find in any of what we talk about today. And again, discard what doesn't make sense to you. Another thing is just that I don't know a woman my age who isn't absolutely stoked and delighted that the world has changed so dramatically from how it was true when we were coming through UNK, which was Kearney State College at the time. So please know that the changes that we talk about are things that we don't resent the fact that there are differences now. I am, and my women friends are absolutely delighted that the world has changed so dramatically, just as my grandmother was delighted that I had different choices than she had. And so that's just another something to acknowledge. The last thing is that the differences that I'm talking about, at least the theorists that I'm going to talk about today, tell us that there are just absolute gut level impressions that we have about people, even though we fight against them all the time. So at least Egley and Carly, who I'll introduce you to later, talk about gender presentation as being the single thing that we still first see in the world. When someone walks toward us on the street, the first thing our brain says is this a male or is this a female? I don't know that that's always true for you, but it's what the research shows has been true over time. And so that has allowed these researchers to, again, develop theories based on that construct. So you may not agree that is true for you, but there's a lot of research that says that no matter how much we fight it and no matter how much we dislike it, that gut level perception is a pretty important one. So I'm just inviting you to accept those things as true as we go through the next few slides. And I promise I'm not going to talk about every single word. Okay, so let's just get started. I'm going to give us another moment, and I'm interested in knowing what your definition of leadership is. And if you don't have a definition in your head, would you please write down a few of the characteristics that you believe make a great leader? Okay, and I'm going to start my little clock over again at 1 minute. So go. $15 seconds. Okay, thank you. So we're only about 7 minutes into this, and I'm already bored listening to my own voice. So even though this hadn't been my plan, I think I will ask for a couple of words from a couple of folks. So I'm going to pick on Sophia because she's my mentee. Sophia Harder, could you give me one word that you came up with in terms of your definition of leadership? Could you share one?
I put that a leader is a good listener.
Excellent. Okay, what about our other Sophia? What did the second Sophia think?
Yeah, so one of mine was that someone who is trustworthy and who leads by example.
Oh, those are both excellent. And as we go through the next few minutes, you'll I think come to learn that those are somewhat on the scale or on the continuum of traditional male leadership and traditional female leadership. Both of those are good women leadership characteristics. So thank you both for sharing. So when I talk about leadership, and I said this earlier, I think about people who, often the first person that comes to mind is not somebody that was in what might be considered a traditional leadership role. Could you write down below your leadership characteristics the first woman that you recall thinking of actively as a leader? Who was she, and how did she impact you? So another moment, please. Okay, that's our minute. So I think I'll do the same thing. I'll pick on just maybe two of our collegiate women. So is Paige on the call today?
Yeah, I'm right here. So
Paige?
I said one of my high school teachers, she basically impacted me. She's an English teacher. She basically gave me confidence in writing and then in presenting in front of people.
Beautiful, beautiful. And what about Macy? Is Macy on the call as well?
Yes. So I said my softball coach in high school, because she told me, or she was like a great role model. She wasn't afraid to say what needed to be said. And she also taught me that it's okay to relax and have fun. You don't have to be serious all the time when playing. So.
Oh, those are terrific images that come to mind for me. In preparation for this, I actually reached out. I just sent text messages to a bunch of women that I really respect and admire and asked them this exact same question. And I'm really interested. The results came back that, well, of all the women who answered, there was one who was over 70. I had 15 in the 60s, 16 people who are in their 50s, 2 people who are in their 40s, 6 people in their 30s, and 4 people that are in their 20s. So a good generational representation. But out of that group, 4 people said teacher, Paige, like you did. And in fact, 2 of them were English teachers, which I think is kind of an interesting parallel there. There were, let's see, it looks like 9 women identified a female politician. So that's definitely, and that was definitely more true the younger the women got. And we'll talk a lot about those associations and who we see, who we're visibly connected to. And then the second most often was supervisors. But between mother and grandmother and sister, if you combine those together, that was the number 1 choice. A lot of folks thought of a big sis or a family member, and I thought that was really special, primarily because that's what was true for me. So that really resonated with me. Okay, so keep those thoughts in mind as we continue to move through here. So you might ask, why did this become important to me? And so I'm going to just walk you through very quickly kind of some early stage things that I was exposed to. And this was in my coursework. So both in my undergraduate career, I was a political science major, but then I went to grad school in public administration and higher education administration. So when I was in grad school, there was a program of study called industrial psychology. I don't even think it's called that any longer. But the point was that we were on the way out of having moved from an agrarian society where people were farmers and kind of lived in more family units and really primarily made their living for their families, into this industrialized world where people were working in factories and working on the floor, putting parts together. And the faster you could work, the more productive everybody was. That was, I considered a important part of our economy, and it was. And now we've moved into this information age where we use our brain more than we use our brawn. And women can compete absolutely head to toe with anybody when it comes to brains, right? So that was really fascinating to me. But I was also studying education. And so I got exposed to some theories of human development that I'd never really considered before. So one of those was, I was learning a little bit about early childhood development. And then all of a sudden, somebody introduced me to Carol Gilligan, who wrote In a Different Voice. And what Carol Gilligan called out, which I had never once thought of at that time, and I was 25 years old at the time, was that we all had been, I had been engaged all my life going through the educational system on how I responded to certain things and how I was developing, and was my development normal. And Gilligan said, wait a second, Piaget and Lawrence Kohlberg, who most developmental theories were based on at that time, only studied little boys. And I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. And so if a little girl, one of the stories in her book was that if there are elementary age girls on the playground, and there's elementary age boys on the playground, and they're playing, let's just say we're all playing softball together, the boys will stick to the rules. And if there's a kid who doesn't bat very well, then that kid can just go sit on the sidelines because they're not going to get us a run. And so we don't care about the feelings of that kid. We're going to play our baseball according to the rules the way it's written. The little girls will say, well, we'll look at that exact same situation, and they will change the rules of the game because they want to include the little girl that just got sat down because she can't bat, right? I'm not suggesting that either one of those are exactly right, but what Carol Gilligan named was an ethic of justice that was how these boys mostly approached the world, versus an ethic of care, which is how she described the way that women would. Now, there's a lot of challenges with her research, and one of the criticisms that she had of Kohlberg, of having too unique of a group of people to draw real conclusions from, she got nailed as well, because she primarily looked at young women who were in all women's private schools, which were children of privilege, right? So again, you can throw this out with the bathwater if you want, but what stuck with me is that what I care about and what I value in the way that I interact with people and lead people, or just am a colleague to people, is really based in an ethic of care, for sure. Really inclusive, really care about everybody being involved. In a meeting, I tend to be one of the facilitator kinds of folks. So if Sophia's talking and she's not being heard, I might say, wait a second, let's go back to what Sophia said. Not because I have anything to add, but I want to make sure that Sophia was heard, as an example, right? That's a perfect example of the ethic of care. So that was one of the early things that kind of made me say, what do you know about that? Then, as I talked about the industrial psychology classes that I was taking, we were studying how to improve productivity in people in the workplace. So that was really more management theory than it was leadership theory per se. But the point was, there were just some gems. And so one is this idea of theory X and theory Y. So if you're a theory X person, you believe that people have to be cajoled at work. They don't want to be there. They come just because they need the paycheck. They're going to kind of grudgingly do the work all day. And it's your job to whip them and keep them in line, right? Whereas theory Y workers are internally motivated. And so your job as a supervisor is to maybe encourage them and direct them, but really that they're internally motivated. And so if you think about theory Y, then you can try to move people through Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I don't know if that's something that you all know about there, but there's his argument is that all of us will instinctively put our first energy towards survival kinds of things. And if we're not eating well and we're not warm, we can't sleep at night because we don't have a warm place to live, we're not thinking about self-actualization. We're just trying to take care of ourselves, right? But if we have our needs met up the triangle, then we can start working on developing ourselves to be the best people that we can be. So when I think about being a person of privilege, I'm not sure I ever really have been hungry. And I'm pretty sure I've never really been in fear of not having a warm place to sleep in my lifetime. And that's grace in the world today. So I can function and think about how can I be the best person I can be because I'm operating at that level. So that was a little bit influential to me. And then Frederick Herzberg talked about motivation theory too in two different ways. He said that there are hygiene factors that exist in a workplace that we don't really pay attention to. But if they weren't there, boy, we'd know it, right? So if there wasn't a bathroom, we had to leave the floor to go find a place to relieve ourselves and then come back, that would hurt our productivity. Or if the lighting was poor and we couldn't see what we were trying to do, we would have a tough time, right? So they're not motivating in and of themselves, but in the absence of those things, we're probably not going to be very productive. And then, of course, there are some motivating things that help us increase our satisfaction and our motivations. So that, again, kind of struck with me. I thought, well, God, the way I see the world, workers are theory Y workers. And the way I see the world is you want to provide the base level of care so that people can be motivated to be the best that they can be, right? I think I'm seeing the world kind of like a woman here. And so, but that's what resonated for me. And I thought it was really interesting. There was a series of research done at the Hawthorne plants, and Herzberg talked about this. So a group of people were told that they were going to be studied, right? And that they were going to be part of an experiment to see what kinds of factors would help people be more productive in the workplace. And they were specifically looking at lighting, overhead lighting, right? And so the group of people were selected. A third of them were put in a room where lighting every day increased a little bit to see if it would make them more productive. Another group was put in a room in which these are the control groups then. Okay, so there's a group that's put in a room and the lighting never changes, and there's a group that's put in a room and the lighting's going down. And the bottom line is, at the end of the experiment, everyone in the experiment became more productive. Didn't matter if the lighting was going up or if the lighting was going down. Why do you think that's true? Because somebody was paying attention to them. They were special. They were part of a group. They were excited to come in and be a part of something. So that was kind of an interesting twist on the idea that there are motivating factors out there, and sometimes they just make a difference. When we got to the point of management kind of becoming more about, or the leadership shifted a little bit as we continued to go on here. And it seemed to me that now we were starting to talk about, we were still talking about management, but we were talking a little bit more about leadership. And so there's this people versus task orientation that you can think about. And one way to think about that is that people either focus on tasks or they focus on people. And if you think about that as a continuum, it becomes a forced choice. The more I spend time talking with people and empowering people and making you feel good at work, and I'm attending to your feelings and your motivations, then I'm not focusing enough on task and you may not get the work done, right? But Blake and Mouton talked about it as a grid, right? So a person you can be in one quarter of the grid that's low task and low people. You're probably not a very effective supervisor if you're not paying attention to either of those things. You can be high task and high people. You can do both of those things. In a lot of, or you can be somewhere else along that grid. Does that make sense? So you can make decisions about those two things independently. And what Hersey and Blanchard did then was say, well, really, if you're a leader, a true leader, you think about that grid, you think about leading people differently depending on where they sit and what their maturity level is and how sophisticated they are. So if a person's brand new in their job, you may have to really help them with task, even and spend a little less time on people skills. Once they get good and they're clocking along and they know their job, then you can spend a little more time on people skills and less time on task. So Hersey and Blanchard kind of added a curve in that talked about when are you telling people what to do, when are you selling them on ideas, and it added this maturity component. So if you wanted to today, you could enroll in a certificate program at Metro Community College to become certified as a situational leader. Means that you know how to read people well enough to know how to adapt your leadership style to fit where they are on those continuums. So I thought that was pretty cool today. And that's where we were starting to really turn the corner toward what I would have considered leadership. So what I'd like you to think about for the next minute, got another question for you here, is when you think about managing, if you were to think about managing in the workplace, making sure the tasks get done so that we can, sell more widgets, whatever it is, versus leading in the workplace, I'd like you to reflect on a current workplace that you're in or a former one. So using your definition of leadership, is there or was there a leader in that workplace? And why is that answer true for you? Okay. So 1 minute on a leader in a true workplace. Ten seconds. Okay, so I'll pick on one person again, just to try to break this up a little bit. So Lauren, I don't think I've heard from Lauren Malone yet. Lauren, can you say whether you can think of a true leader existing in a workplace?
Yeah, so I used to work at a grocery store, and one of my coworkers he just like always knew kind of like what to do, and he always like helped people also. Like I was obviously like newer than he was, and so he always like helped me like figure out like what to do, or like helped me learn, and he was always like nice about it too, which I think was the real difference besides like other people, is like he was willing to help and like he was nice about it too. So
nice. So he wasn't lording over you or making you feel or minimizing you in any way. He was just helping.
yeah.
Nice. That's a great answer. So that's a really good answer, in fact, in terms of leadership. So, okay, so time has passed. Again, remember, 62 years old. So those theories that we were just talking about, those are from like the 40s and the 50s and the 60s that I was learning in the 80s, right? And then all of a sudden we're kind of knocking on the door of the 21st century. And there are some real additions, I think, to the leadership literature and management literature that, again, really, really spoke to me. So a couple of them are, I read Donald Schoen, who talked about the reflective practitioner. And Schoen's point is that we become more competent and more effective in what we do when we think about what we do as we're doing it. Okay, so we go through a work day, and in what I've come to believe as kind of a Jesuit, honestly, a Catholic Jesuit model, is at the end of the workday, we stop and we take 2 minutes and we breathe and we say, how did today go? What went well? What am I proud of? What didn't go well? What would I like to do differently tomorrow? How would I handle that differently? So his whole idea was that the more that we stop and think about it, the better we'll be. Once again, in this binary existence that I'm forcing us to think through today, to me that felt like a female approach. I think the more the women that I think of as leaders tend to be spiritual people, thoughtful people, and many of my women friends and professional women are journal, and they write their feelings down as a way of processing. That's a very reflective approach, and I highly, highly recommend it. So Donald Schoen really spoke to me when he talked about that. And in fact, when I wrote my dissertation, I and talked with professionals in my field, I coined the phrase collaborative reflection, because for me and for many women that I had interviewed, not only did they reflect personally, but they felt like they became more effective when they shared that reflection with someone else and let the other person, so they had a sounding board for their reflections. Does that make sense? And so I see that as collaborative reflection. Then I got introduced to Daniel Goleman. So emotional intelligence for you may feel like, for many of you younger folks, may feel like old news because again, he first started writing about it in the early 90s when you were infants. Or if maybe not even born yet. So it may seem like old news to you, but to me, it was revolutionary as well. And I'll tell you why. Most of our lives, we were taught, the women of my generation, and I'll be really curious to hear if some of the other mentors feel this way, have very strong intuition. And I tend to make decisions that feel right to me. Now they feel right because I've processed data for sure, but I also have instincts that tell me if something's right or wrong. It may be a fight or flight response. It may be just biological, I don't know. But for me, my instinct is just as important as anything. But it had never been valued. I had never read a single thing that told me that that was important in leadership. So I was a little angry at the time, frankly. Not angry, but I was a little frustrated that it took a guy to write about this, to have it have credibility, but I was grateful that he did. So Daniel Goleman started writing about emotional intelligence as being a co-partner to IQ. You got into college based on your IQ, not your EQ. And he spoke very loudly about the importance of valuing EQ and finding a balance in our world of brain versus heart. And he also talked about the fact that EI can be nurtured and taught. It has been adopted widely across a number of different fields. It just really has resonance for people. And so to me, that was really another critical piece. I didn't even take the time to put on the slides a couple of others, like maybe you've heard of Robert Greenleaf's servant leadership, which talks about the importance of leaders not being in it for themselves. Leaders are in it for others, right? And so servant leadership is really a great concept too, if you haven't been exposed to it. I also had the wonderful fortune of being trained in trustee leadership development. A trustee in a bank is someone who takes your money and holds it and manages it for you. Or a trustee on, if in a family, if a child lost its parents, for instance, that child would have a trustee that is who manages everything only exclusively 100% for the goodwill of the child. So if you think about being a leader and being tasked with that level of commitment to someone else, that's what trusteeship's about. So again, huge difference, huge movement from thinking about productivity and using people for a particular end to really growing people and helping folks be the best that they can be. So all of that became true for me. they all really, really spoke to me. So I think that was kind of a hard right turn. And that was happening at the same time that women were becoming more and more and more a part of everyday life. So we have now in the 21st century, the world is just a completely different place. Doesn't mean there aren't still differences. And I think I've read a lot and heard a lot in the last few weeks about, or in the last few months about what a significant difference COVID has made into how we're having to reevaluate that women bear the burden for family responsibilities. And so many women have dropped out of the workforce to care for children. And there's a real fear that it's going to be hard for them to sort of drop back into the workplace. There are a lot of industrialized countries around the world that have way more advanced maternity policies than the United States does, that guarantee that when a woman leaves her job to go have a child, her job is guaranteed to her after a full year of maternity leave, and she returns at the same pay. It's like unheard of in this country. And it's one of the reasons that accounts for some of the differences, some of the gender differences that we still experience. But I think there's some amazing small wins out there. And I think we're absolutely on the right trajectory. And I wrote down that I've got an N of 2 because I raised sons. And during the time that I was single momming my children, I stopped doing service work in the community. It's something that I care about, but I really took to heart that the best thing I could do for the world was raise 2 boys who cared about women and who cared about contributing well and being ethical people, that kind of thing. They married amazing women, and I see them as not exactly equal partners. I still grit my teeth every once in a while, particularly at my oldest son, whose wife is very patient with him. But they're way, way, way more equal than I've ever witnessed before. And their wives are just amazing women who are really making their way in the world and making a difference in the world, which I really love. So again, I think that's the promise for all of you, is that if you ask for it, you should be able to find partners that are supportive, because they were probably raised by strong women themselves, right? So I'm grateful about that. Okay, so some of the data to reinforce that we are in a new place. So it's only been since 1964, so this is my lifetime, that employment discrimination is unlawful. Okay, so we shouldn't be surprised that the march has been slow and long, but that it's changed. In the civilian labor force, at least on some of the research that I did, is that in the 1900s, only about 20% of women were in the workforce, and now more than 60% are today, which seems actually a little bit low to me, but if you think about it, it includes women across all ages. So about 60% of women are in the work, and about 20% of those are part-time. Men went from being 80% of the civilian labor force to only being 70% of the civilian labor force today. But only about 11% of them are part-time. So there's definitely more men are working than women, but more of the men that are working work full-time than the women. But the trajectory has changed really well. I mean, it's pretty highly. I don't know what the numbers are at UNK, but at universities across the country, which is I work in higher education, women have outnumbered men in colleges and university undergraduate study for years, like for 20 years, I think, and now make up about almost a 60-40 split now, if you look at it nationally. But more importantly, at advanced levels, in master's degrees and PhDs, women have caught up and earn more of those degrees than men do. The one exception is in business. So MBAs, women still earn fewer, and fewer women study business and finance. So Joyce it's absolutely fair to say that she was one of the early women who really helped to change that pattern. But anyway, so that's I find that to be really interesting and bodes well for the future as well. On the Fortune 500 list, if that's something that you care about, there are, in the late 70s, there were only 2 women on the whole list of Fortune 500 executive CEOs, out of 2 out of 500. In the early 2000s, there were 10 women, so that's about 2%. And the 2020 list has 37 women on the Fortune 500 list. 37 is not a lot. When you say 37 is not a high percentage out of 500, it's only 7%, but it's way more than 2. So there's some progress being made there. And of the billionaires in the world, the women who are the top 3 women billionaires in the world make less than half of the top 3 or 4 men billionaires in the world. So Jeff Bezos, even after his divorce, still is worth $113 billion. It's a lot of money. But his former wife is the 3rd richest woman in America. And she's, oh, I didn't write the number down. Shoot. I don't know. I didn't write the number down. But Alice Walton from Walmart fame is the wealthiest woman in the United States of America. She's number 1 on the list of women with money. The other thing that I think is really interesting about this, though, I don't know how true this used to be. I can name people like the Rockefellers or that gave money away, but Jeff Bezos has started giving away an awful lot of money. And Bill Gates and his wife Melinda have a foundation, and they give away an awful lot of money. So people out there are doing good things with their funds, and I suspect that has to do with the female influence a little bit. We just got through a heck of an election. That was crazy. At least I thought it was pretty crazy. But just a couple things about politics. The college women on the call today see women leaders all the time. And you see women leaders in very visible spaces, like a Nancy Pelosi, right? She's in the news virtually every day. AOC is in the news every other day. So there are some really negative images about women in politics. There are some very positive images about women in politics. But more importantly, there are images of women in politics. That's just really different. So when I was growing up, at the congressional level, there have been 325 women who have served in Congress so far. But today, there are 23% of the women in Congress, or 23% of Congress is women. There's 101 women following the 2020 election. That's a lot of female faces. That's exciting to me. In the Senate, there have only been 57 women over time. It's a much smaller body. But 2018 in Congress, 2018 was considered the year of the woman because there were 103 women in Congress from the last election, 101 now. But there are currently 26 women in the Senate, which is essentially 25% of that body. So again, even though women make up half the world, we're only 25% of the Congress, but that's still darn good. In 1932, there was the first woman that was ever elected to the Senate. So I do think it's interesting that 17 of the 57 women were appointed to their seats. They weren't elected into those seats. And of those 17, 7 were given their husband's seat when their husband passed away in office. So I think that's a little interesting history, just as an aside. But at the presidential level, that's where we've, I think, really seen the most change. So I've written down more notes than I probably should talk about. But in 1972, when I was in junior high school, Shirley Chisholm ran for the Democratic presidential nomination. She didn't win it, but she was one of the first. She was the first woman, and certainly the first Black woman, to run for office, and so that gave some visibility that had not existed before. So I was proud of her for that. In '84, when I was just out of college, a little after I was just out of college, Geraldine Ferraro was the first woman on a nominated ticket. So she ran it with, Walter Mondale. She was the vice presidential nominee. So that was huge because she was actually on the final ticket. Hillary Clinton was lost the nomination. She tried to be the Democratic pick back in 2008, but she lost to Barack Obama. When she tried to get in 2016, she was the first person to be the nominee on a presidential ticket. But you all saw a woman named Sarah Palin, right? Carly Fiorina, who's the former CEO of Hewlett Packard, vied for the Republican nomination against Mitt Romney a couple of years ago. So there's been some visibility, again, at the highest level in the land that you've been able to enjoy that was just not true for those of us who came before you. That's really, really important because we're going to talk about the concept of co-occurrence. When you see leaders, when you see a politician, and the only politicians you see are men, we grow up assuming that men are politicians and women are not politicians, because not because they can't be, not because of a skill set, it's just you've never seen a politician who wasn't a man, right? You've never seen a football coach who wasn't a man. So it's a big deal when all of a sudden there's a football coach that's a woman. That's a huge deal. And it opens a lot of doors because the impressions that we have about who can do what change over time. So I just think that's really, really important. That visibility is really important. So because of stereotype, if you think for just 1 minute, 1 second about how people viewed Hillary Clinton, at least in my circles, I heard a lot of the B word when people talked about Hillary Clinton. So she was strong, she was bright, she was capable. There was some concern that maybe she wasn't entirely ethical, but people thought she was a bitch, right? She didn't get elected. Can be very frustrating, but that's a stereotype of a strong woman. And to the point of Joyce's presentation earlier, most of my growing up years, nobody spent any time thinking about how to convey a message so that it could be heard by the other person. My male boss would just tell me to go do it. And if I didn't do it, I could go find another job. Right? So anyway, my point is that those stereotypes do still exist. They are breaking, but they are still out there. So I'm interested if you have experienced shame, or if you have experienced a time when you felt judged or minimized based on some stereotype. Lachelle, you happen to be on my screen at the moment. You have blonde hair. You know, have you ever been judged because you're blonde? I've certainly been judged because of my age. Some of the women on the screen have probably been judged because you're young. You're not capable. So can you visualize times when you felt judged or minimized? Secondly, can you visualize others who are of the same characteristic of you who seem to have been able to rise above that stereotype? And how did they do that? I'll give you a minute to think about that question. Okay? About 10 seconds left. Okay. So I think I'll ask one of the young women on the call or on the screen to share an answer. Cassidy, you happen to be on my screen at the moment. I love your purple wall back there. Would you mind sharing your answer? Would you feel comfortable sharing your answer? And I think you're on mute. There you
Yeah. I really don't know of a lot of times where I personally have been like played into a stereotype. Like all the jobs I've had have been predominantly female run. Like I'm a barista and I work at a daycare, so those are both like predominantly female. So I haven't really experienced it, but I've definitely seen it with other people. But whenever I think of like a female overpowering, like the stereotype, I always think of like AOC. Like I don't want to go into politics necessarily, but I don't know, just kind of seeing how she handles herself and how she's not really afraid to like say what she's thinking. I always find that really inspiring.
Nice. I really appreciate that. And Jean was really shaking her head and when you said that. That's right. But I agree with you. She comes across to me as very strong, but she is never unkind. Or I've not seen her, at least I've not seen her be unkind, even when she's being treated really poorly. And so, Jean, you're shaking your head. So I would like you to take yourself off mute if you wouldn't mind and just share the thought you're having.
Cassidy, thank you. It takes guts to say what we want to say. And while you're doing a great job on this presentation, good job. This is important because I see, like you said, AOC, Hillary Clinton, Kamala Harris. I mean, the list goes on. We could also look at, who I think Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I was going to go back to think of people in science early on, who have developed and who were women of courage and strength, who worked in fields, no men, where men were predominant, and to be able to come out and give information, present, and be heard. So many women before us were not heard. Writing, experiments, I know who were stolen, experiments stolen from women and used by the men in the organization, in the research. And then here we are, and it was given to them as their award, even though they didn't do the work. So it is a tough fight to not be considered that B word, but to be strong. And I was thinking in terms too, you've talked a lot about being humble, and that's where I really struggle and work hard at being a humble woman, accepting thank yous when I receive them, but making sure that things are done in order and correctly. Being a scientist, it is difficult working with groups of men and being taken seriously, but things have changed. And I just give an example. I am on a committee for Univar Solutions, is where I'm the chemist at. I'm a national operations chemist, so I work throughout the United States. And we have an LGBT plus community. And I was asked to be a core member and to assist with that. My oldest child is transgender. Evelyn is her name. And so I'm on a committee. I can't even imagine back in '87 when I graduated from UNK or Kearney State that people would even talk about, these types of, gay people. I knew many and I loved them and it's fine, but, you just didn't have that. Now we have women who are leaders. We have companies, international companies, that have committees or groups for members to be allies like myself or in the LGBT community and empower people who are different. And that's what I love about your program. I mean, this is, Kim, this is just so wonderful to have that ability to be a strong person represent people who may not have that ability. And that is my job, is to make sure that people who don't have the voice yet are able to find that. And as women in the Gold Torch Society, we are given that. What a miracle that is for all of us. Wow. So
Nice.
that is my head shaking. Yes, yes, go, Kimberly.
Very
Love
good.
it.
Jean, thank you so much for sharing that.
You
I
bet.
would, I did write down that the first openly gay person in Congress was a woman named Tammy Baldwin. That was in 1999. Now, again, I think it's important that we say openly gay, because we know for sure there have been gay people in Congress all along, but she was the first person who claimed it. And then the first openly bisexual person was in 2013. So those gender stereotypes are changing for sure. So thank you, Jean, for sharing that.
You bet.
So, okay, so important thing, try to rise above those stereotypes whenever you can. So, okay, these are the two books that make up the rest of this presentation, or the core of the rest of the presentation on women's leadership, and they're important for really different reasons. I know I'm taking too much time here. I'm going over a little bit, so I'm going to have to breeze through this a little bit more quickly. So I will. But the first is Alice Eagley and Linda Carley wrote a book called Through the Labyrinth, and their whole point is that they don't think that in the 21st century that the glass ceiling exists any longer. Now, again, there are people who would argue that, but I think for the mentors that are on the call, many of the mentors that are on the call, and certainly for me, that was the image that existed, that we could climb, we could scratch, we could do whatever we wanted, but eventually there was going to be a level at which we could not rise any higher. And that's what that glass ceiling is. They're academicians, and their book was published. So I thought it was important to say that their book was published as a research study from the Leadership for the Common Good. So again, there's some differences that you'll read and hear about as you continue to pay attention to this, between sort of more corporate focused, sales focused leadership and common good, public good, social service, social justice kind of leadership. There's value in both, but these particular women had more of a social justice kind of presentation. But their point was that we've gotten to the point that there's a lot of women who have achieved a lot of amazing things, and every one of them had a different journey. And so it was really more about finding their way through the maze than it was hitting a glass ceiling, okay? For undergraduate women, I think that's a little bit less so. And Sheryl Sandberg wrote Lean In. And I think I hear the words lean in all the time now, like almost every day I hear somebody say, you know, we really need to lean into that. But those words were hers. The first time I ever heard them spoke was in 2013. And her point was, and she was already at Facebook at the time, I'm pretty sure, was that as women, the only opportunities that are going to be available to us are the ones that we take. And that men for years, let's see, I have a quote that I wanted to share, that men are promoted based on their, shoot, I turned it over, I can't find it, based on their, what we think they'll be able to do. Women get promoted based on what they've already done. So we're already behind the curve. We have to prove ourselves first before we're given the next job. Whereas men, again, generality, huge stereotype, but tend to be a little more aggressive in job searches. They don't have the same level of humility that women tend to bring to the table. And so Cheryl's point was that we have to identify strategies to gain access. And one of those is to just be brave enough to lean into opportunity when it's there. So I think there's maybe a little bit of a break between the listeners, but at any case, very quick question for the mentors: do you believe that glass ceiling was real, and do you think it still exists? And then for all of us, do we think that the labyrinth image of a maze that a woman has to find her way through better describes the way that women journey through today? And it's perfectly okay if you say, we don't need a separate image. Women no longer need a separate image. We compete the same way that men do, right? So you may not even think it's helpful to have a separate image. So 1 minute on these questions, if you would. start. Okay, I'm going to stop you just because even though that was only 45 seconds, I'm running way behind. So let's go through this next piece just a little, very, very quickly. So generally, Egley and Carly did a lot of research to sort of explain why these differences, these gender differences exist. I can't talk about all of these, but I'll just sort of name them, right? So the first is that males dominate because males have historically been stronger. They go out hunting and killing and etc. The women have to bear children to keep the society moving forward, and that there is no equivalency between being a sperm donor and the kind of time and energy it takes to carry a child, breastfeed a child, raise a child, right? So that's the first. Secondly, was that there are sex differences that just came in the more industrialized age that are based in those same domestic responsibilities. But because we became more industrialized, that widened the gap a little bit because men became the controllers of the financial rewards that came from that industrialized society. And so that was a secondary feature. A third is the psychology of prejudice. We've talked about this a couple of times, but at least Egley and Carly say that they believe that few people intentionally discriminate. We don't discriminate with negative intent. We just discriminate because we group people. That's a survival mechanism, et cetera. And we already talked about the association of co-occurrence. When we see people doing certain things, we see women as nurses, we see women as teachers, that's what we associate, okay? And if you, I don't know what your percentage was, but I did not have a male teacher until I was a junior in high school. So certainly one of the career fields I thought about for myself was being a teacher because I knew a lot of women teachers. I never saw lawyers in my childhood, so I didn't think about a woman being a lawyer, right? So we have to think about that co-occurrence as being a part of that problem. But the primary point that Egley and Carly talk about is that there's two different ways that we can lead. One is in a communal way. We make communal associations, and those are, the word communal comes from community, right? Or they have the same root. And people that are communal are more affectionate and helpful and kind. All the things that we've already talked about today. Agency, agenic associations, are more about assertion and control. So I talk about my 2.5-year-old granddaughter as really developing agency. Man, that girl is fierce. She'll go up to the jungle gym and start climbing it. You know, she doesn't wait for permission. She doesn't look around to see who's around to help her. She just goes and does it. That's agency. It's just taking control and doing it for herself, right? So people with agency are self-confident, but they also, on a more negative side, tend to be a little, at least from my value system, a little aggressive, a little too self-confident, a little too individualistic, not as much concern for the other. But across time, Egley and Carly just prove over and over again that across time and across cultures that we have made associations of women to the communal approach and associations of men to the agenic approach. And that comes in the 21st century, that provides a double advantage for men, because men, if we allow men to be agenic by gender, when they act kind and helpful, wow, they're really amazing, right? For women, the reverse is true. We expect women to be kind, helpful, agentic, which we already devalue. So that's the first problem. But then when they act strong, then there's a negative association with that. So there's the double bind for women, and Hillary Clinton is a perfect example of that. They say that the world is evolving because even though it takes a lot of time for all of this to change, and women have had less access, they haven't had a lot of access to have the kind of influence that we would like for them to have. You will now find places where boards of directors are required to have female representation. As an example, there's evidence that companies are more profitable when there are women involved in the leadership because the decision making is just different. There's a different perspective that's brought in. So I already talked about a couple of the other things, so I'm going to flip through this really quickly. And by the way, we're going to share this with you, so I should have said that at the beginning. You can have this presentation later. But anyway, bottom line, Egley and Carly, their primary point is that for us to be successful, we have to blend well communal and agenic styles, and we have to try to work those two styles together into our approaches. And I think Joyce's presentation was a perfect example of being able to be kind while developing a very clear message for a person. That's an agenic characteristic. So that's exactly what Egley and Carly concluded. They also, their second suggestion, because they were unwilling to say, here are the keys to success, because they think it's different for every woman, but they did say, blend communal and agenic, and then also you have to build social capital. You have to ask for and utilize a mentor. And then I would add, find a circle of women friends who are supportive of you, women professionals who are supportive of you, and encourage and empower each other always. Early women in the workforce had to compete against each other a lot, and there was a lot of negativity associated with that, but the numbers are with you now. So it's not a scarcity mentality any longer. There's a lot of women around that could be helpful to each other. I think I'm going to stop just for a second and ask Shauna, because we're at time, but we have an hour to talk about these concepts with each other after we take our break. So Shauna, let me get you on my screen here.
Yes, I can hear you.
Would you prefer, I think I have about another 10 minutes worth of stuff.
Okay.
Is it better for us to keep going for 10 and cut 10 out of the discussion? Do you want me to stop and we'll start again at 1? I pick up and finish this presentation, and then we have our conversation about that.
Let's just go ahead and you power through your last 2 minutes, and then we'll make up for the time in the breakout session.
Perfect. Okay, thank you very much for that. I
No
hope
problem.
that's okay with everybody. I promise you'll get a chance to eat something. So anyway, okay, so the question here is that at least Egley and Carly think that the world has changed enough that this more blended form of leadership is coming into fashion, and that we all like it better, frankly, and that it's working pretty well. Talking about a good coach resonates with me way more than talking about a controlling boss, right? And I think one of the reasons that Joe Biden has been successful in his campaign this year, this is just my opinion, I think that Biden's style was more communal than it was agenic throughout the presidential campaign, okay? So I'm not even going to take the time for this question, but I'm just curious what your reaction to that is, and you can talk about that in your small group. Do you agree that he was more communal as opposed to agenic? Would you describe his style as a more female style? And is that part of why it resonated with almost 80 million voters? Okay. Okay, so for Sandberg, she doesn't like the glass ceiling metaphor either. She doesn't really like climbing the corporate ladder as a metaphor either. She likes jungle gym because we really are jumping around and having to adapt and all of the way. So I thought that was kind of funny. But she really shook the world a little bit. Back in 2010, she did a TED Talk in which she identified what she believes, or believed at the time that she did this writing, was that the reason that there aren't more women in leadership is because there's an ambition gap between women and men. So again, broad generalization, right? But her question was, what would you do in the world? What would you achieve in the world if you weren't afraid? And our fears are based in a lot of things, like other people's expectations for us or whatever that might be, right? So her point was that women sometimes hold ourselves back for a lot of different reasons. And some of those are unintentional. We don't even know that we're doing it. Okay, so that's her primary premise. Then she spends a lot of time in her book talking about how it is possible to achieve both professional career advancement. Obviously, she worked for the Department of the Treasury, then she worked at Google, now she's a COO at Facebook, right? She's a big deal, right? But she also had a family. As soon as this was published, she received a ton of criticism. She is a woman of extraordinary privilege. That woman has a lot of money, and she had a husband who was very supportive, and they paid a nanny to live with and care for their children. So the part of the criticism from the average, single mom was, this is good in theory, but I don't have the circumstances that you have. To her credit, she really heard that and tried to make that right. But more importantly, her husband was on a elliptical one day and died. And they have young children. And so she very quickly was hit in the face with, well, how do you do this if you don't have that kind of partnership? So I think it's just a really interesting story. But her point is, the point for me was that she wrote from a completely different premise than Carlene Egley had. She was younger. She had had amazing career success. Remember, they were academicians, so for them, most of this was theoretical. For her, she lived it, right? And she had done some amazing things. So she just talks about how it's important to not perceive limitations. I mean, you'll run up against them. Your job is to figure out how to solve those. Don't let them be limitations for yourself. And it's going to be hard to do that. But you also have to name your goals. And then she's got a chapter called Seek and Speak Your Truth, which is part of why I opened today with, look, this is my truth. And it fits. There's some people that'll fit for, and there's some people that it won't fit for. So you just have to own that. She believes that sexism still exists, and she describes all kinds of reasons why that's true. A very simple example is a study done with college students in which these are students in an MBA program. It's called the Howard and Heidi test. Exact same story shared with students about a very successful entrepreneur. If the name was Howard on the successful entrepreneur, students described this person as really likable, really capable, great guy. If the entrepreneur was Heidi, and that's the true story, it really was Heidi, described as, well, she's not really a very trustworthy person. She seems really individualistic. She's kind of out for herself. I don't think I'd really want to work for her. It's the same story with two different names. So anyway, sexism still exists. But the other thing she talks about, and this is what I see in my children, is you need to make your partner a real partner. If you're gonna try to do this, and you're gonna try to be married, and you're gonna try to have children, to the extent that you can, set boundaries and figure that out first. And I thought that was a really important message for most of us. And then finally, she said, this is a social movement. We have to just keep moving forward. My twist on that, and I think for me, what I have chosen is to just lead from where I am in the best way that I can. I chose my own glass ceiling, right? I'm so proud of everything that I've accomplished, but I also am a mom. And for me, I wanted to be a mom first and a leader second. And I've been able to do both to a certain degree, but I'm perfectly comfortable that I've never been in Doug Christensen's shoes. I could have aspired to be a president of a college or university. I have the Ph.D. I've got the experience. I can do it. I don't want to do that. I don't want to be there, right? So that's the truth I'm claiming for myself, and it's perfectly comfortable for me. So I would invite you guys to do the same thing. This question, I'll ask you to just write this down, and maybe you could think about this over lunch. But I bet if you're in the Gold Torch Society, that somewhere along the line, you've led from the middle. And this is exactly the description that we heard earlier of a coworker at the grocery store who chose to help and chose to empower someone else because he could, right? So I want you to think about a time that you stepped up to lead from the middle. And in some cases, I can tell you that I've led from the middle because I had a really inept, the person who was supposed to be leading had abdicated that responsibility, right? So I don't care why, but I just am curious about times when you've led from the middle. And if you really stopped and thought about it, why was it you? Why wasn't it the person beside you? Right? What characteristic do you have that caused you to do that? Because I really want you to grab onto that and own it. Okay? So think about that question. This is, I promise, honestly, the last content slide. I talked a little bit earlier about Daniel Goleman and emotional intelligence and the fact that that had been grabbed onto by other people. And Goleman ended up writing with, I can't even pronounce, Boyatis and Annie McKee, a book called Primal Leadership. And in Primal Leadership, they identified these key competencies. Well, they're emotional intelligence competencies of leaders. And I invite you to just look these over really quickly, because I suspect that some of these words are on your short list of what makes a good leader. And I'm, again, really inspired by the fact that these words, to me, really speak to what I would consider historical women's leadership, because it's about influence, it's not about power, as an example. One of my favorite phrases is that power rules, but love wins. I love the idea that love wins. So again, I could get really political on everybody here, but I will avoid that. But I think love wins. In 2020, I think love wins. I've included the references, and these are going to be just for you for later, but you can see that some of the stuff that I've referred to today is pretty old, and then some of it is newer. It's kind of an old book, but Susan Kamavais, who is in my field of study, she's a student affairs administrator in colleges and universities. Way back in '98, she wrote a book called Exploring Leadership for college students who want to make a difference. And there has, I believe, been a more recent edition of that. I don't have the more recent edition, but for the college women in the room, that might be a nice thing for you to access, because it would potentially help you. Final slide is just the final question. And again, this is for conversation when we get together later. But I know that there are mentors in the room who have pursued careers and reached the pinnacle. So, you don't become, Linda, the president of Mosaic without being really, really capable and really, really committed and really, really caring. So I just honor that and appreciate it. Some of the rest of us are still on our way. Some saw limits and broke through them and then stopped shy. So I already said, I'm one of the people that probably stopped shy of what I could have done, but I did it for reasons that were really important to me, and I don't have a single regret. So I hope that that'll help empower you to feel like you can choose your own path. So the final question is, have you shifted your leadership definition in the last hour, just having been exposed to some different ideas that you hadn't known before? I'm really hoping that if not during the next hour, but after today, that you can really think about what your hope is for your leadership journey, what that's going to look like, and then set a plan to get there. What are the steps you can take next in the immediate term that will help you to get there? So I'm so grateful for having had this time, and we will talk more after lunch. Shauna, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, I'm going to have you stop sharing your screen for a minute so I can just give everybody some instructions about the breakout session.
Okay, so stop share.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Kimberly. So wonderful.
Thank you so much. That was great.
Thanks.
So for the breakout session, everybody's received a link that says breakout session. If you open up that particular link, you will see there's like 4 different quadrants. In that you will have, you find your name about what session you're in. There's 4 different sessions, and that's the link you're going to click on to join your breakout session. Since we did go a little bit over and I want you guys to grab a bite to eat, we'll start that breakout session at 1:10. Those breakout sessions will go for 30 minutes. And then when you're done, you'll log out of that session and click onto your afternoon session link. And your leaders will walk you through that when that happens. I know some of you had some issues with your links this morning, so I will go ahead and send you the breakout link and the afternoon link just in case you guys can't log on. But you can call me or email me during this break if you're having any issues, okay?
Very good.
So we will see you guys at 1:10. Great?
Awesome. Thank you,
Enjoy your
everyone.
lunch. And Joyce, if you want to hop onto your session, I'll let you get access, okay?
Thanks.